In early September 2023, the U.S. national debt reached a staggering $33 trillion. As of the end of July 2023, the debt was approximately $300 billion less, with around $7 trillion categorized as intra-governmental debt holdings, essentially money that the government owes to itself. The bulk of the debt, totaling about $25.7 trillion, was held by the public. The term national debt often invokes concern, but in reality, it's more of an accounting record. It tracks how many dollars the government injects into the broader economy versus how many it retrieves, primarily through taxation. Is there a compelling reason for the national debt to be precisely zero? Not really. Debt serves various useful purposes, particularly in emergencies. Throughout the pandemic, the national debt surged by almost 90%, reflecting its role in addressing both rainy and sunny days. Despite its utility, economists and politicians express concerns about the potential negative impact of an ever-expanding national debt on the economy. Currently, we must consider the interest rate on our borrowing and the growth rate of our economy. If the growth rate outpaces the interest rate, it makes the debt more sustainable. The U.S. economy undeniably possesses the resources to gradually pay down the debt, or at least pause its continual increase. However, achieving this requires decisive political action. The question then arises, why does the U.S. struggle to manage its national debt? And is it even necessary? The majority of U.S. debt is held by the public in the form of government securities like Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. When the government needs to borrow money, it issues a bond, a document either stating "I owe you this much money in the future," or outlining specific interest payments over particular timeframes, eventually returning the full amount at a later date. Essentially, the government provides us with the opportunity to exchange some of the dollars it has introduced into the economy for a different form of U.S. currency known as a government security. The U.S. dollar holds the position of the world's reserve currency, making U.S. treasuries highly sought after. Treasury debt is widely regarded as an exceptionally safe and secure asset, attracting those in search of a reliable investment. The allure of purchasing U.S. government bonds is particularly strong for individuals seeking safety and security in their investments. Public debt has historically served as a tool for addressing emergencies, seen as a preferable means of financing compared to burdening the current generation with immediate taxes. The late 2000s, marked by the global financial crisis, and the more recent COVID-19 pandemic both witnessed a significant surge in debt as a contingency plan to manage economic shocks. However, a concerning trend emerges as the pattern of continuous borrowing persists day in and day out. Rather than borrowing solely for emergencies or long-term investments, there's a growing tendency to borrow for immediate consumption. Any borrower, be it an individual, business, or government, risks undermining their financial or fiscal future in the long run when borrowing for immediate consumption without long-term benefits. A critical metric in this context is the debt-to-GDP ratio, representing the debt relative to the size of the economy. Currently, the U.S. is nearing a debt-to-GDP ratio of almost 100%. Typically, for an economy of the U.S.'s magnitude, a stability benchmark hovers around 70%. This ratio is pivotal because it indicates the ability to service the debt, meaning repaying the debt and covering the interest to the lender. The recent interest rates assume significance as the government must pay interest on its existing debt, and with rising interest rates, the net interest payments undergo a significant increase. Since March 2022, the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates to deliberately slow down economic activity. While this move helps control the economy, it also means the government has to allocate more funds to service its debt. Balancing national programs becomes challenging without accumulating even more debt. In 2022, the federal government spent the substantial $475 billion on interest payments for the national debt, amounting to nearly 2% of GDP. The Federal Reserve's decision to raise interest rates is resulting in a substantial windfall for bondholders, injecting hundreds of billions of dollars in additional income to those holding government bonds with higher interest rates. While debt plays a crucial role in supporting the economy, facilitating large initiatives like infrastructure projects and addressing crises such as the pandemic, careful attention must be paid to the debt-to-GDP ratio. This ratio serves as a crucial stability indicator, signaling whether the country can effectively service its debt or if the balance is tipping. Debt, when utilized wisely, can be a force for good, supporting initiatives that benefit the economy in the long term. However, it's essential to discern between good and bad uses of debt. Public debt, in particular, is a legacy passed on to future generations, similar to the quality of the environment, infrastructure, and other societal assets. Striking a delicate balance between the costs and benefits that we transmit to the generations to come is imperative for responsible fiscal management. As the wealthiest nation on Earth, we find ourselves in a unique position, leveraging resources from the future through borrowing. One prevalent source of confusion or misinformation regarding the national debt is the notion that it burdens the general population. There's often talk about the national debt imposing a burden on future generations, fostering fear by equating the federal government's budget to a household budget. This line of thinking implies that if the government continues to borrow and accumulate debt, it might eventually face a situation where it can no longer afford its expenses. However, this comparison is fundamentally flawed, as the government's budget operates in a vastly different manner than that of a household. The United States is not alone in carrying a significant amount of debt. There are 15 other countries with higher debt-to-GDP ratios, with Japan holding the world's largest. Economist Stephanie Kelton argues that Japan's economic situation serves as a compelling case for challenging the commonly held belief that debt is as harmful as mainstream economists suggest. Japan has consistently run fiscal deficits over the last 3 decades without experiencing inflationary pressures, skyrocketing interest rates, or crowding out private investment. Contrary to what mainstream economics predicts for countries running persistent fiscal deficits, Japan has not faced fiscal solvency crisis. The Japanese example, viewed with the benefit of hindsight, reveals that the anticipated issues such as debt default or crisis haven't materialized. This is partly attributed to the low interest rates at which Japan borrows and the sluggish growth of the Japanese economy. The counterfactual scenario, that is, how much faster the Japanese economy would have grown without the burden of substantial public debt, remains unknown. The U.S. national debt often grabs headlines, especially in conjunction with terms like default and debt ceiling. A default occurs whenever the government fails to make a payment as promised. Interestingly, the U.S. shares the concept of a debt ceiling with only one other country, Denmark. However, Denmark has set its debt ceiling so high that it rarely becomes a significant issue for them. In the United States, the debt ceiling serves as a self-imposed constraint, established by Congress. This limit presents a unique challenge, as Congress instructs the executive branch to spend the money authorized for specific programs in the budget, but prohibits the issuance of more of a particular type of security to facilitate those payments. This places the executive branch in a delicate position, needing to find alternative ways to continue spending as it is legally authorized to do so, albeit with restrictions on the usual spending mechanisms. The existence of the debt ceiling issue is often viewed as entirely unnecessary because the government cannot spend money unless authorized by Congress in the first place. The ongoing battles over the debt ceiling can carry significant consequences for both the U.S. and the global economy. In a notable development, Fitch, one of the bond rating services, downgraded the U.S. credit rating in early August 2023, shifting it from the top category to a slightly lower one. This downgrade was attributed to a combination of factors: the increasing debt-to-GDP ratio in the current forecast, the absence of a clear plan to address this issue, and the perceived governance challenges evident in Congress during the recent debt limit buildup. The latter was particularly marked by the threat of default from many congressional Republicans if their demands were not met, contributing to concerns about the nation's fiscal responsibility and stability. As of December 2022, approximately $7.4 trillion of U.S. debt is held by foreign governments or investors, constituting 30% of publicly held debt. The significance of the stock of debt held by foreigners lies in the potential repercussions if these countries start viewing it as an unsafe investment, possibly triggering a run on the proverbial bank. Concerns arise because a debt crisis can resemble a banking crisis. Much like a sudden loss of confidence in the solvency of an entity leads to a run on the bank, in the case of a debt crisis, there's a parallel international dynamic where foreign holders of U.S. debt may start divesting. This could happen if there's a lack of consensus in the U.S. regarding fiscal policy. The debt-to-GDP ratio continues to rise, and interest rates gradually increase, making it more challenging for the U.S. to meet its existing debt obligations. In response to these signals, some foreign investors may decide to sell U.S. treasuries, amplifying the potential impact on the global financial landscape. In the grand scheme of things, the U.S. national debt isn't poised to be paid off anytime in the near future. While there's a broad abstract support for deficit reduction, the real challenge lies in its practical implementation. People tend to resist spending cuts that impact them directly, while simultaneously endorsing tax increases that may also affect them. This dichotomy complicates the process of effectively cutting the deficit. The trajectory of the debt is a cause for concern, though it doesn't currently pose an immediate crisis. However, there's a substantial minority that argues we are confronted with numerous other pressing issues and, in that context, can afford to shoulder some additional debt. Thank you.